very, very important what we're trying to highlight today, which is our climate change adaptation strategy. That is a brilliant response to the catastrophic floods of 1953, the Thames River barrier, and you'll remember what it does. It's capable of preventing London from suffering from catastrophic inundations. Even if the sea level was to increase by a metre, or maybe even I think up to 2 metres, that Thames barrier could cope with it. And it's our job in the GLA and the Mayoralty to make sure that we have climate change strategies ready to cope, not just with tidal flooding, but of course with flooding from upstream.
Well, we have found here in the city of London, Ontario, that for us, we wanted to be a leader. We wanted to be sure that we did some initial work to look at not just our own community as it is today, but how in the future, as we plan and grow, how climate change and the impacts of that may have some impact on our own community. It may be nothing, or it may be something. And for us, we want to be at the front end to know what those answers would be long before we actually plan how our neighborhoods will grow.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you, Greg, for that introduction. In the spirit of transparency, which IBC is really committed to, I may have designs to be the president of all the P&C companies in Canada, but I am currently only the president of 3 rather small companies, but I welcome this chance to be here with you this afternoon. As you can see, my presentation today borrows its theme from Charles Dickens' classic novel, a novel that begins, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times." Dickens was writing about the late 18th century, of course, but those words can also be applied to the world today. For humankind, these are the best of times. We've seen in the past few decades a period of tremendous economic growth and prosperity. Of course, we all know about the current financial crisis, but we'll get through that. And over the longer term, people are living longer, and they are living better. For instance, in the developed world, life expectancy has increased by 10 years since 1960. Also in developing countries, rapid technological advancement has helped raise incomes, and the number of people living in absolute poverty have been reduced from 29% in 1990 to 18% today. Now, there's more to be done, certainly, in regard to that, but there's been progress. For the planet we inhabit, however, and for the cities and the neighborhoods we call home, these are the worst of times. Through its 4.6 billion year history, our Earth has undergone some significant climatic shifts. Ice ages followed by periods of warming, followed by more ice ages and more warming, and so on and so on. But while global temperatures have always fluctuated, the current warming is taking place at unprecedented speed. The primary cause is rising levels of CO2. And the reason for that, of course, is the impact that we humans have on our planet. Now, there's no need nor time for me to inundate you with all the evidence for this reality. Others have certainly done that and continue to do it. But I will share with you one visual that illustrates the point. This chart clearly shows that the rise in global CO2 levels since the Industrial Revolution far eclipses rises in atmospheric carbon dioxide previously. Suffice to say, there is now little doubt amongst the scientific community that our planet is suffering and that much of the blame can be placed on its most clever inhabitants. Our industry bears witness to those consequences of climate change. Property and casualty insurers have watched their payouts from extreme weather more than double every 5 to 10 years since the middle of the last century. In fact, since the 1970s, there has been a 20-fold increase in global natural disaster insurance claim payouts. So far in this decade alone, insurers have paid around the world $246.2 billion US in disaster claims. At the same time, our methods for predicting the recurrence of extreme weather are woefully out of date. Our experts tell us that certain events should only happen every 50 years or every 100 years. But consider the St. John River in New Brunswick. Now, from time to time, we can expect that river to overflow because of spring thaws and rainfall, but flooding has become so severe of late that there have been three so-called 100-year storms or events in just the past 35 years. And closer to my home in Toronto, in the past 8 years alone, there have been 3 100-year events and 5 50-year events in the last 8 years alone. Clearly and respectfully to everyone who works on them, our old models just don't hold up currently. There's no question that we are seeing more extreme weather than ever before. In particular, we're seeing more precipitation and flooding. And at the same time, our infrastructure is getting old. It's no longer able to cope with the increased levels of precipitation that we're experiencing. This is a serious problem facing Canadians today. I'll come back to that a little later. But just as I will not use this time showing evidence for climate change, nor will I use it to discuss the various methods for mitigating climate change. There are many different ideas on how to reduce our dependency on carbon fuel, but this is a discussion for other forums. One such forum that does come to mind is the Canadian federal leadership debate. I hope that climate change is on that agenda tonight because it needs to be. Now, my interest today is not to convince you that it's getting warmer or that we need to reduce the carbon footprint. Instead, I want to discuss our need to adapt to change. Because even if every coal power plant around the world were decommissioned today, even if the development of Canada's vast tar sands were indefinitely postponed today, even if the number of vehicles on this planet were reduced by 50% today, there would still be enough CO2 in the atmosphere to motor the destructive forces of climate change for at least the next 50 years. Let me remind you that the exhaust fumes of the Model T Ford from early this century are still contributing to the wind and the rain that is punishing our planet today. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we need to get on with the task of identifying how it is that communities across Canada and around the world, how they can prepare themselves for the kind of severe weather that is already in the cards of our future. Not as Dickens would have told it, but in a spirit of adaptation, I promised you a tale of 2 cities. And here they are. Those 2 cities are London, England, and London, Ontario. Now, aside from the name, London and London don't have much in common. London, England has a population of about 7.5 million people. London, Ontario, a mere 352,000. The history of London, England dates back more than 2,000 years. London, Ontario has only been around for 200 years. But they both have a Thames River. And they both have problems with those rivers overflowing time to time. And this is especially problematic because, as it happens, the property values along those rivers are very, very high. And most important of all, both cities are addressing these flooding problems. They are at the edge of the cutting edge of adapting to climate change. They are municipal leaders in the true definition of leadership. They recognize that more extreme weather events are the new reality in which we live, and that communities have no choice but to become better equipped to deal with those catastrophes. Those of us here today have much to learn from their example. Let's look at London, England first. Back in the 1970s and the 1980s, engineers in that city created the Thames River Barrier. As it now stands, this technological marvel can help control the mighty Thames, even if the water level rises by as much as 2 meters. The barrier has been used effectively many times since its completion. But the city has recognized that in the face of climate change, this level of protection is no longer sufficient. And in a demonstration of leadership, they've decided to do something about it. Recently, Mayor Boris Johnson of London announced an exciting new plan to help the city adapt to future flooding. You saw a clip from that media event at the beginning of this presentation. The London Climate Change Action Plan is groundbreaking, and it's multifaceted. The city will use parks and marshland as deliberate flood storage. It will plant new trees for improved water absorption. City officials intend to map London's drainage network and develop a plan to reduce surface floodwater risk. And they will limit new construction in areas prone to flooding. Their action plan also recognizes that residents must play a role. The city will invest in raising public awareness on this crucial issue, and it will create incentives for homeowners to make their houses more resilient. I think this action plan represents a marvelous evolution from the thinking that created the Thames River Barrier. The barrier was designed to restrict the flow of water when the river rose, and it continues to do that effectively. But these new initiatives recognize that water is a powerful force that will run its course no matter what you try to do to stop it. London's leaders understand the most strategic response is simply to make more space for water. Tim Reeder of the London Environment Agency explained why the barrier will simply not be enough for the long-term future.
Well, the Thames Barrier and the defences were designed to last through to 2030 with a bit of an allowance for sea level rise, and that's what they should do. But nevertheless, with climate change, which could accelerate sea level rise, an ageing infrastructure, where we're planning now to see what we should be doing for the next 100 years. Well, London's going to have to learn to live with a changing climate, and doing some of the things that we're planning to do, such as reducing water demand, learning to live with flood risk, learning to live with hotter days. We need to do that now anyway. So learning to live with climate change means doing more of the same, but being prepared for a different future at the same time. So if we're successful on adaptation, we're going to be more sustainable.
Mr. Reeder also explained why the UK is a leader in adaptation to climate change.
The UK, I think, has been one of the lead countries on adaptation, and we need to maintain that position. So we're planning at lots of levels, right down from the government through the regions, the cities, to local areas, to adapt the whole country from the bottom up and the top down to the effects of climate change, and we need to carry on doing that, reviewing the science, seeing whether our estimates are right, and carrying on as we are at the moment.
The river barrier is an incredible device. I marvel at the people who thought about how to put it together and make it work. But it's not enough. And what you hear coming out of London certainly is forward thinking at its best. Accepting the reality of climate change, preparing to live with it, and tackling the problems at all levels of government. We need to hope that other governments and municipalities around the world and in Canada sit up and take notice. Now, the plan that I've been talking about was the product of the London Climate Change Partnership, a joint effort that brought together the private and public sectors to address the issue. The Association of British Insurers, which is the UK's version of Insurance Bureau of Canada, was one of the founding members of that groundbreaking partnership. Just like IBC here in Canada, the ABI is on the vanguard of change and recognizes that change needs to happen at the community level. Swenja Saminsky from the ABI explains why the insurance industry needs to be a leader for those communities.
Well, we see ourselves as adaptation champions. There is actually a huge need for public awareness raising on this issue. The focus is really on making the country resilient, making our economy resilient and our communities resilient. And insurance can play a huge role in this, and I think this is also our responsibility to play a huge role in this.
To put a finer point on why the industry has this responsibility, Ms. Saminsky went on to discuss the 1953 storm surge that flooded the UK as well as other countries on the North Sea. She said that if the same weather event took place today, it could lead to property damage of more than 16 billion pounds, one storm. That's 30.2 billion Canadian dollars. Now, those of you with European parents certainly know the severity of this issue, just as I do along the East Coast and the Gulf Coast of the States. Let me take you to another London, Ontario. Recently, that city also took some very proactive steps towards preparing itself for the increased levels of extreme weather we are already seeing. And in doing so, it put itself well ahead of a pack of Canadian municipalities. The focus for now is a comprehensive risk assessment of the city's vulnerabilities, a significant first step for which the city has committed substantial funding. Here's Anne-Marie DeSico-Best talking about that effort.
Our council has committed to about $1.3 million, and it's a program that will be done in phases, and each of those phases are going to give us what I hope is some good information that will tell us again where we are as a community today. Do we have any areas that might be vulnerable, or are we on good footing? And certainly as we grow as a community, and we are a growing community, we want to be sure that we have the right protections in place for any neighborhoods to ensure that if there are any changes with Mother Nature, that they are not going to have any problems. So we're just at the beginning stages, but the money is there, and our council is very committed to doing the studies that need to be done.
How fitting that London, Ontario should be another city on the leading edge of adaptation to climate change. It's also home for the industry-funded Insurance Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction, ICLR. And that's a world-class research facility that finds ways to make buildings and communities more resilient. Also in London is the Insurance Research Lab for Better Homes. This one-of-a-kind facility is funded by IBC and run by engineers from the University of Western Ontario. It simulates extreme weather, including hurricane-force winds, in a controlled environment by using some specially designed pressure boxes. Another one of those marvels that I wonder how people come up with. The important thing is that researchers will use the lab to study the structural integrity of houses and to develop more cost-effective ways to build stronger, better homes for Canadians. Through ICLR, through the research lab, and through other initiatives, Canada's insurance industry makes clear its intention to lead the change in addressing the impact of climate change. So what else defines our industry as leaders in addressing climate change? Certainly, IBC is very busy in the area of adaptation. In recognition of the immediacy of this issue, IBC's board of directors has struck a strategic committee to develop a comprehensive plan that will guide IBC's directives. They've brought together a formidable team of industry executives led by Jean-Jacques Henschos, President and CEO of Swiss Reinsurance Company of Canada, and he's joined by Jean-Francois Blais, Alistair Campbell, Kevin Hutchings, Bob LePage, Kevin McNeil, Sylvie Paquette, and Andrew Steen. And I know some of those committee members are here at this conference, and please inquire about the work that they're doing, because it is going to make a difference. The committee is focused on Canada's aging infrastructure as a priority area, and in particular, the capacity of our water and our sewage systems to withstand increased precipitation. The strategy will remind governments, consumers, and insurers of what they can do to promote Canada's successful adaptation, community by community. You see, in this fight, everyone has a role to play. The long-term goals that we are striving for need to be very clear. Communities must be ready to withstand the impacts of climate change. All levels of government must contribute to making the necessary changes to bolster preparation. And individual citizens must recognize how they, too, can play a role and make a difference through how they live and where they live. IBC, on behalf of its members, is set to changing the culture of planning, building, and land use in Canada. It's the same spirit that we saw in the London Climate Change Partnership. And just as the British insurance industry was in on the groundbreaking floor of that collaborative effort, so too will the Canadian industry be in on the ground floor of the work done here. There's also a question of how our industry will encourage consumers to contribute. As individuals, we need hope. We need to believe that our seemingly small actions can and will make a difference. Insurers are in a position to encourage change through financial incentives, for example. For instance, possible incentives might include discounts for homeowners who retrofit their homes or install sewer backup valves. Our industry can also encourage consumers to make other smart choices. As I've mentioned, a major problem here in Canada is aging sewage infrastructure, and its inability, because of that, with the increased precipitation that we are seeing. Quite simply, we're getting more water than ever before, and it just has no place to go. We certainly need municipalities to upgrade their systems, but at the same time, what if homeowners were urged to lessen their burden on those systems? Here's one idea that may surprise you. How about the use of rain barrels? That's right, rain barrels. If we've convinced people to bring their empty cans and bottles in a box to the street, if we've convinced people to compost, if we've seen solar panels and windmills evolve from peculiar, eccentric ideas to accepted innovations that dot the landscape, if we can come to a conference and leave with a folio made of jute, why not rain barrels? while perhaps not on par with the technological marvel of, say, the river barrier, this little invention can make quite a difference. Now, of course, the concept of collecting water has been around forever, for a very, very long time. But it's a concept that we've gotten away from in recent decades. Perhaps it's time that we gave more thought to the potential use of a rain barrel. You see, the benefits are significant. They reduce your water usage by providing a ready source of soft, non-chlorinated water for your lawn and garden, and at the top, out at the bottom with that spigot. They significantly reduce the amount of water pouring off your roof during a rainstorm. They decrease the chances of water seeping into your basement. Maybe we could get rid of those ungodly sight long drains away from downspouts. And maybe most important of all, what rain barrels do is they limit the amount of water, they could limit the amount of water that enters municipal sewer systems in a very condensed period of time. Now, one rain barrel is not going to make a difference. As you can see, this one in front of me would keep just 45 gallons of water from pouring out into the street and into a sewer system. A drop in the bucket, I agree. But if one whole neighborhood of 1,000 homes implemented a rain barrel strategy, that would hold back 45,000 gallons of water from going out into the street and sewers. And if an entire small city of 55,000, say someplace like North Bay, Ontario, got on board with such a plan, you could keep 2.5 million gallons of water out of the sewer system. That's the equivalent of 5 Olympic-sized swimming pools. And can you imagine the difference it might make? Can you imagine the money saved for our businesses on sewer backup and other damage claims? And what would it cost us as individual homeowners? Not much. A rain barrel can be purchased for less than $100. And I think it's a perfect example of how individuals, by taking small actions, perhaps collectively, can make a very, very big difference by working together. Now, we in the insurance industry are also striving to make a difference. Companies like Allstate are now donating our old computers, our old furniture, to schools and to nonprofit organizations. And think about that, going for good causes instead of opposed to loading up landfills that are already at their capacity across Canada by not putting in thousands of tons of discarded equipment. And rain barrels, just like solar panels and windmills, I want to suggest they're part of the same evolution. I want to suggest that attitudes are changing in many ways, and this could work. I spent a little time this afternoon musing on the words of Charles Dickens. But let me for a moment share with you a quote from Lao Tzu, that Chinese philosopher and founder of Taoism. Lao said, "Nothing in the world is more flexible and yielding than water. Yet when it attacks the firm and the strong, none can withstand it, because they have no way to change it. So the flexible overcome the adamant, and the yielding overcome the forceful." Lao Tzu was speaking metaphorically, of course, about how people ought to live their lives. But I think we can ponder a more literal interpretation of this quote. When dealing with something as potent as water, it behooves us to be flexible and yielding. Or in other words, we need to learn to adapt. As London, England has learned with its river barrier, there's a limit to what we can achieve if the only plan is to hold back the water by force. The two Londons have taught us the merits of adaptation. of accepting that water will find its course, and the best way to do that is to give it more space to go. Again, this can be done in many ways. Modernizing and expanding our existing sewer systems, creating areas for deliberate flooding, learning to live and work in areas far away from areas where we know flooding will occur. And then, yes, even through the use of rain barrels. And the two Londons have also taught us that solutions have to come from all levels. Federal and provincial governments need to make a contribution. At the same time, most solutions need to be implemented at the municipal and at the community level. And there are things that we can do as individuals. In other words, we all have a role to play. Part of my goal today was to shine a light on a role that IBC thinks the insurance industry needs to play. Having helped Canadians recover from natural disasters in this country for more than 200 years, having seen payouts from these events rapidly rise as a result of climate change, having served as leaders in risk management and natural disaster preparedness for many years already, our industry is in a unique position to lead this effort. More than that, our industry has the responsibility to lead this effort. But don't take my word for it. Let's listen to some of our policyholders tell you what they think about this subject.
There should be programs in place that people can access and numbers they can call if there's the case that this increased water is causing homes damage.
Some kind of incentives to help prepare yourself, and also education about what to do to your homes.
Can't have development without recognizing the limitations of the existing infrastructure.
I think we need to plant more trees. I think that the more that our environment is deforested, the less roots we have to soak up all of that water.
Just more green space in general, less asphalt, more permeable surfaces, permeable driveways, things like that. I mean, the idea is to get the water under the ground quickly as opposed to having it go straight into our sewers.
And that's what we're all working towards. As we move forward, IBC will be leading the industry efforts to help Canadians adapt to climate change. We look forward to you for your support. Thanks for listening.